So many of us love roses, and they really are so beautiful when painted in watercolor. So in today's video, I'm sharing 3 different ways to paint the rose. Let's take a moment to talk supplies. Whenever you're using watercolors, it is so important to use proper watercolor paper, and this is cold pressed paper from Canson. I also have a little Derwent pocket set. I'm just loving this set recently. It's got some great pinks and purples, which is wonderful for doing roses. A couple glasses of clean water, and then I have a number 4 round paintbrush. This is a sable hair brush that I've also really been enjoying as of late, but you can use any round brush that comes to a nice fine point. Now, as I said, this palette is wonderful for flowers because it has a magenta and a violet, there's a yellow, and I love mixing up some peaches and pinks and burgundies. It also has a bit of white, which is nice for mixing those peaches and light pinks. Now, I'm going to start my first rose, and we're beginning in pink. Nice magenta. I'm going to start by doing a sort of stippling on the page, a whole circle made up of dots, a very perfectly imperfect circle made up of dots. And then I am bordering that circle with some small broken curving lines. This first rose that we're painting is very round. The finished product is very round, so think about that when you're painting. You want to keep sort of forming a circle. And so these broken curving lines are going to get larger as you move outward, and you'll use the belly of the brush and just drag it across the page and sort of sweep that brush stroke into a curving line. Then you're going to form everything into a circle, allow all those brush strokes to sort of meet. You can add a little more dark paint at the center. I like to have the outer portion very light. And yeah, let's try this again so you can see really up close here. I'm going to do the second flower in a pretty peachy tone, and I start with that stippled center, a whole bunch of little dots in a cluster, and then we start doing these tiny circular lines surrounding those dots. And the center is very tight, very small, and then these curving lines get larger and larger as we move out. And I also tend to work more water into my paint so that the flower gets lighter and lighter, and it has this rich dark center that looks like it's indented. And so yes, I am just adding more and more curving lines, and I want to form a circle, but not a perfect circle, a very, very perfectly imperfect circle, because the more imperfect it is, the more natural it's going to look. We can add a bit of more dark paint, maybe a few more curving lines, and then that's it. This is the simple rose. This one, I think, is very achievable. This is the rose that I started with when I was learning watercolor, and I always go back to it because it is so beautiful in its simplicity. You can add a few leaves if you like. That's not really what this is about today, but I did think it would be fun to kind of frame the flowers a little bit with a few leaves, and so I'll probably do that for all the roses. But really, this video is just about showing 3 different styles of roses, and we're sort of going to move from what I think is the easiest to the ones that are a little more complicated. So I'll add 1 or 2 more leaves here, and then we're going to move on. Okay, flower number 2. I think this one follows the same formula, but it's slightly more detailed. So instead of starting with dots, we start with 2 lines curving around sort of a U shape. So the center is a little different, but then we sort of follow the same formula. You're going to see me make these curving lines using the belly of the brush and dragging it, and then using the tip of the brush to add that little bit of detail to bring my petal to a point. But I'm, going around in a circle, and I'm allowing my brush strokes to get a little bit larger, and also the paint to get a little lighter in color. I just add a bit more water to it. And you can see how the rose sort of emerges. We've got these dark, tight, curving petal shapes at the center, and then as they get lighter and larger, it looks like the petals of the rose unfurling away from the center, and you just sort of keep going around and around. I think these roses, these last 2 roses anyway, it's about knowing when to stop, because you can sort of keep going around and around and around, but there is a natural point, or there is a point at which I think it looks natural and it looks like this very perfectly imperfect rose with one petal here and no petal on the other side. So don't aim for perfect symmetry. Just keep going around, add a petal here and there, and sort of step back, take a moment, and know when to stop. And it's okay if you don't know when to stop on your first one, that'll come. I'm adding a little bit of darker paint to the edges of some of these really, really light petals. That'll just help give them a bit of definition. And then as the center portion dries, I can come back in, if I like, and add just a hint more dark paint to help me with that contrast, but that is certainly not necessary. It just depends how much detail you like to add. Okay, I'm going to do a little hint of a rosebud there. I'm just making like a U shape with some light pink paint. I added a little too much dark paint, but that's okay, we'll clean that up. And then for this rose to finish it, I decided it would be fun to add some eucalyptus. I've mixed up a really gray green. So this is Payne's gray with a bit of minty green and a lot of water and a lot of white. And I'm doing these sort of oval or circular shaped brush strokes on the page to make the look of the larger, I think this is a silver dollar eucalyptus. And I'm going to come in with a tad darker paint there and sort of join everything together, put some little stems, maybe add a bit of darker paint to some of the leaves. And then I'm gonna leave that. We'll let that dry, and we're gonna come back over here to our first rose. And this is sort of an optional step, but you can add a bit of darker paint at the center. So if you want even more definition, even more contrast, just adding that darker stippling and maybe a few curving lines can really take this rose to the next level. And now that the eucalyptus has had a chance to dry, I'm going to come back with a darker but still very minty gray green, and I'm going to add a smaller eucalyptus. I just start with a curving stem, and then I place these tiny sort of horizontal leaves down the length of it, and they get larger and larger as we go down the stem. And some can be on an angle, so they're quite thin, and others can be quite round, and I think that gives the look of a nice sort of bouquet of eucalyptus and roses. Super pretty, and you can continue to add little sprigs of greenery wherever you like. And yeah, I'll just tuck a few more leaves in here, and then I am all done with this one. Okay, time for our third rose. This one is a lot of fun, and we covered it in our episode 10 of Watercolor Florals, so you might recognize it. But I start with a scribble, a very scribbly center. Just be free and scribble. And then we do the same thing. We go around that area and we enclose it with some curving lines. Once we have this circular, somewhat circular center, we'll continue outward with those curving lines, and you guessed it, they get slightly larger as you move out. So these 3 roses, I think they all look quite different, but they all have a similar formula. And if you practice the first one, then you get confident and move on to the second one and then to the third one, which I think the third one is a little tricky, but I still enjoy practicing. So we continue outward. My brush strokes or my petals are getting larger, and I've added water to the paint, so it's getting lighter or more translucent. And I'm just deciding, where do I need another petal? I need a couple across the top here to sort of enclose the flower, and then maybe one more on the bottom. So again, you don't want a perfect circle. You don't want too much symmetry. And I think it just takes practice to know kind of where to place the petals, but just keep going around. Go in a circular motion, you know, keep going around and around, but just keep in mind that it doesn't need to be symmetrical. There can be one extra petal on one side and not the other. You can add a little bit of darker paint while it's still wet, just for extra contrast. And I'm going to leave that one and move on, and we'll do a second. So I start with this scribbly center, and then a couple curving lines enclosing that center area. And those lines, of course, get a little larger, and I just drag the brush across the page to create this very very loose petal shape, and we can use the tip of the brush to make sure those petals come to a bit of a point at the edge, and just keep working your way around and around. This one I'm doing in a nice peach. Some of the petals aren't quite as large, they're just sort of peeking out from behind other petals, and then some are very large. So that's another thing that comes with a bit of practice, but you can follow along with me as well and put your petals in the same spot, and I think that will help you get the hang of it. As I said, if you want to see this rose in more detail, check out episode 10 of my watercolor florals series. And here all I'm doing is coming in with a bit of a darker peachy ivory color and adding a few more curving lines just to get that contrast. Okay, and then I decided to add a little baby's breath to this first rose design. And so what I'm doing is I have a light gray. I've been really into practicing white flowers lately, so maybe in the near future there will be a tutorial on painting white flowers. But anyways, I'm using a light gray and I'm doing sort of a stippling to make these little circular areas, like little puffs of cotton, little tiny puffs. A little extra water doesn't hurt to sort of soften the stippled area that you've painted. And then of course we're going to connect this burst of what looks like little tiny cotton balls with some very delicate green stems. I'm just using the very tip of my brush for that. That's what's so great about round brushes. They come to a nice fine point, but they also hold a lot of paint in their belly, so you can do large areas and very tiny areas all with one brush. I'm adding a few more blossoms, I guess, and then that's it. My little baby's breath spray borders those flowers nicely, and it's all done. And then I decided to just add a little bit of veining to the leaves, so I've got a dark green, still quite a translucent paint, lots of water mixed in there, but I'm just doing like a line down the center, a curving line, and then a few broken lines going out from that center line. And I am going to complete my piece today by giving this last rose a stem. So we'll do one rose that actually has a stem, and I'll add a few leaves, and I think that's about it. I think that's going to be it, yeah. So I've mixed up a dark green. You can see I often do leaves in the same way by simply pulling the brush across the page and sort of just seeing what sort of shape emerges. And I tend to use quite light paint, quite a translucent green for that initial leaf shape, and then I'll add a little extra dark paint into the puddle wet area, and I just let it seep out. Okay, that's it. I am all done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing 3 different styles of roses. Practicing all of them will definitely make you more proficient at painting this beautiful flower. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.